Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the supportive viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Quincy, on Quinsippi Island in the Mississippi River, where the Friends of the Log Cabins are at it again. We've done several stories from here. The battle here is to keep these old log cabins in this community above flood stage. So one by one, the cabins that are here, you know, they're attempting to raise them up so they can save them for decades and decades to come. And right. John Gebhardt, you've been at this yourself for a while. Friends have been at it, what, since 1960s? Or?
Well, actually, the village itself was built in 1968. The Friends got involved in about 2006, 2007 to save the village because nobody was doing anything with it. And the Park District had decided that if nobody's going to do anything with it, we'll give them back to the original owners. We heard about it. We lost 2 of the cabins in that process, but we were able to save the rest of them.
Now, it's interesting because we're standing right in front of your 2 latest projects.
Right.
The Clad Adams cabin there, which is finished. You
right.
raised that one up. This one is the Frazier cabin, which you're presently working on.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the Frazier cabin. It's old.
The Frazier cabin is the oldest cabin in the village. It dates to 1828. It was on the way between Alton, Illinois and Warsaw. In fact, it was north of Quincy, just before you get to Ursa, and it was used as a stagecoach stop and a halfway house.
Okay, so and this was then donated to the park here, and
right?
It was moved from the Ursa area to here back in the 60s.
Right, and the reason a lot of these cabins were moved here is to save them for future generations to look at them.
Now, this one I said is very old, 1828.
Right.
That predates any of your other cabins here.
Right.
Donated by the Frazier family, moved here, but then 3 years ago, you started tearing it down.
Yeah, we had to because it had been deteriorated way beyond where we could actually just do some restoration work on it. They had not set it on a good cement foundation, and so they had tried to raise it a little bit by putting some treated wood under it, but that just did not save it. So in 2017, we had a workshop, and we actually had a couple of individuals coming in, one from Eastern Illinois and one from west of St. Louis, to observe and help disassemble the cabin. And if you notice the chart behind us, we labeled each log.
Let's take a look at that, because this is an interesting project.
Yeah.
This process is, people say, well, you take it apart and you put it back together, but you got to know exactly where every piece goes, don't you?
And
how do you go about doing that?
We put jar lids on each of the logs, and then you also marked a picture with what the logs were at. Like this is the west side, this is the east side. And each jar lid is marked according to what side of the cabinet it is and what level. So these are marked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so this log will always go right there, 5th up on this side of the house. That's where it fits. It's like putting a puzzle together.
Right, and that's the thing you're going to find out from our contractor is it is like putting a puzzle back together.
You say your contractor. Now, when we opened the program, we had a group of guys behind us. They're on a lunch break right now.
Right.
But you can't, it takes special knowledge and a very special experience to be able to do this, doesn't it?
Right, and it's hard to find people like that. We were fortunate to find Joe Gallagher of Historic Preservations, who was teaching classes north of us in one of the smaller towns in northern Illinois, and I found out about him, and he agreed to come down, give us an assessment of the village, gave us an idea of what it would take to restore them, and we've been working on it ever since.
As we go through this program, we're going to be able to talk to the foreman over here about what sort of special experience goes into doing this kind of work.
Right.
We'll get to watch them do some work because they're going to be back to work here in just a little bit. You later on the program can take us on a little tour through the village so we can see what other cabins are here.
Right.
But before we do that, I think there's an interesting story that you have about in 2017 when you took this apart. You had nowhere to store it, so you stored it on site and you covered it with tarps so it would be protected. But the whole point of raising these things is when the water comes up, you don't want to flood it to damage the thing. So what happens?
Yeah, we get a flood in between
You get a flood.
because you have to raise the money. We're very fiscally conservative in this area, and we decided we wouldn't do it unless we had the money in the bank. And so it takes about 2 years to raise enough money to do a cabin. And in the meantime, you're right, we had a flood.
Yeah. So what happened? What happened to all the material?
Well, the logs themselves lifted up as a pile and floated behind the church and basically sat down as a pile. But what it meant is the next year we basically had to bring them all back, clean them off, and put them back on the pile so they were ready for the contractor to use.
I bet those things are heavy too when they're all sopping wet and laying
Well,
there.
we waited till they dried out.
Yeah. They're still heavy, aren't they?
Oh yeah, we had one of our board members luckily had a tractor with a forklift, and he was able to lift the logs one by one, and one by one we'd bring them over here, put them on sawhorses, clean them, and then put them over into the pile. And they need to be stacked with air between them and all that to keep the critters from eating them up.
Yeah.
And then we basically put them back in the pile, and then we covered them again over the winter because you don't want snow sitting on them.
There's another issue here that we need to talk about while we're talking about it. If we look over just next to that, I guess it's a crane of some sort, but if we look to the left, you can see a pile of logs there. That's where you stored them. But they're not all usable again. When you take down an 1825 cabin, sometimes the wood just isn't any good, right?
Right.
So what percentage of the wood do you think you were able to save?
Luckily, I think we saved about 75 to 80% of the logs.
That's good.
And so basically when the contractor put them back together, he was able to use the logs that had been there and then added new logs. And we got new logs from a supplier that just happened to be north of Springfield, Missouri. And Ryan Vincent was available, and he was agreed that he could provide the logs on the date we had a contractor coming, because that's important. We did not want the logs to be here before the contractor got here, because again, we don't know what could happen to them.
And they have to be aged logs.
Yeah.
You can't have new ones.
No.
They got to look. They got to be already like shrunk, I guess.
Right.
And they have to be old.
Usually
they have to
most
look
of
old.
these logs are coming out of barns, because when they're tearing down old barns, they salvage the logs. And they have to be a certain length, and that was the biggest issue. 3 of the logs had to be, I think, 26 feet long. And it's hard to find 26-foot logs, especially in Illinois, because that wasn't the standard they used in Illinois.
Well, this is the Frazier Log Cabin when they tore it down in 2017. And as you can see, it's quite a process getting it back together. We're here right before they're going to get the roof on, which is a great time to be here because, Helaman, we can actually see what it's going to look like. We can see in our imagination what it's going to look like.
Yes, yeah. So as a builder, I do the best I can to be able to see this when I get here and there's nothing, right?
Yeah.
So that I can see the end from the beginning and make the correct decisions throughout the whole process.
We just showed a storyboard, and that's what the disassemble process looked like. And you really rely on that. You and your guys really rely on that. And you go look at it several times, don't you? Because it's got to be right. This has to be put together just the way it was disassembled.
100%. In this case, I mean, historic buildings they're all different, but for the Frazier cabin itself, it is critical for the park and the Friends of Log Cabin Association that we get the look just right. And so we're mixing old with new and old with older logs and timber, etc., to make this thing look exactly like it, well, as close as it can to the way it was before.
I assume you start at the bottom and work your way up. Tell us about putting the floor or the foundation, whatever it is you're going to describe to us here first.
So foundation was here before we got here, but essentially those are just big timbers, and they lap the joints and then screw them together and level them out the best they can. When we got here, there was no floor system, so we actually pulled some of the gravel out of the middle and framed a floor system with conventional treated 2x material.
Okay.
Using modern day dimensional lumber and hangers, etc. And then on top of that, you can see the 2x planks. And those are they range 2x12, 2x14-ish in that size. And a lot of those are original, right? You can see in some of these pictures that those planks actually run out past the existing logs. And so we did the best we could to save what was there, put it back in exactly the way it came out. They were, a lot of the good material was still labeled, so we stacked them exactly as they were before. And then working up from the floor.
Let's go a little closer and take a look.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's work our way up.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
show me how you do it.
So working up from the floor, we take, I mean, this is a new side. Can we come over here to this corner? Here. This corner, I think all of these were existing except this bottom one. And so what we did when we first got here is all the logs, as John explained, were over in a pile, right?
Right.
And we took what was existing, what was usable, what was not usable, and we just laid it out, right? We laid it out on the ground and decided, okay, we've got east, west, north, south, courses 1 through 7, right? And we have to put a puzzle. It's basically just like putting a puzzle together, right? And you lay out 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 1's garbage, so we need to find a new one that's about the same size, about the same length, etc. So as you can see, this is a new log. That's, well, new to this building.
Right.
It's an older log, but it is very close to the same size as these next 4, right? So we did that did the best we could on every log that we had to replace, as we try to match it with the same size or close to, so that we can get the height right once we get up to the top.
Do you have to end up doing any notching or any of this so these logs fit together, or is that all?
Yes, so I do. Once again, a lot of it has to do with the historic fabric of the cabin, which is the existing stuff, right? We want to do everything we can to preserve and maintain the exact look of the way it was before. So if there's an old log that went, like when we get up to a notch, I'm trying to see if I can find one that has an existing log. I think these two, right? So this log and this log are existing from the old building. Well, this notch, it could have used some work, right? We could have had it sit down maybe a little bit flatter, but in my mind, because this is existing and that's existing, I'm not going to touch it. I might level it out a little bit so I can get a good screw in it and it'll be stable.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's going to stay just like it was.
Yeah. And when you put them together, do you screw them together, or do you just take like those big nails from railroad ties and just drive them down in?
I would. I like the spike idea, but it's a little. It's actually a little easier for us to use what are called timber lock screws. And so I've got a big drill, and we countersink them so you can't see them. And then you can get 8, 10, 12-inch long screws, and we go right through the notches. And oftentimes we can pick up 2 or 3 notches of the same screw.
Now, they had to tear the roof off this thing because it was done. Correct. So you end up having to build a new roof for it, right?
Yes, that's exactly.
Do you use modern day lumber for that, or did you?
Yeah,
so these are just 2x8s. They're stained. The Friends of Log Cabin organization stained those for us so that they look a little bit older, right? And yes, all of those they're just 2x8s. The ridge beam is a double 2x10, and we're gonna pretty much use modern day conventional framing practices to put the new roof on.
Okay. And when I looked at this picture, I could see that they looked like shake shingles or something on there. What will you use?
Same thing. Yep. So we're gonna sheet it, because the 4x8 sheets of plywood, they create that stability that we really need. Historically, they would use what they do, skip sheeting, which they use 1x8s or 1x10s, and they space them so that the cedar shingles can breathe. Well, in this, we're going to sheet it, and then we'll waterproof it with some ice and water shield, some tar paper, etc. And then they have a cedar breather that goes between the plywood and the shake shingles themselves. And that allows the shingles to breathe get air around them, and then they last a lot longer.
And you and your crew think you can do this in a week to a week and a half. Is that about your time frame?
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few little touch-up things that I don't think we're going to get to on this trip, but we will have it dried in. We'll have the roof done. Windows and doors will be on, and we'll get it closed up the best we can.
Terrific. Well, thanks for the interview, and we can start making noise again. Your crew can start actually going to work again.
For sure.
Thank you. Dan Conboy, you're on the board of the Friends.
That's right.
And we were talking a little earlier about the fact that, you know, in fact, the contractor just mentioned the fact that the Friends had those stained, those roof joists stained for them when they got here. You had a little something to do with that, didn't you?
Yeah, I spent the good afternoon staining about 12 or 13 of those boards.
Yeah.
So.
And we also told the story about the fact that after the old cabin was torn down, it was stored. The flood washed the logs away, and you had to retrieve them. And actually, you helped with that process.
Yeah,
too.
that was my initiation to the board. I had just come on the board and said, we have a project one Saturday morning.
Oh man! Well, you got to be ready to do anything.
That's true.
But maybe the most important thing is raising money, because you've got this crew here for about a week and a half.
Right.
That's an expensive process. Plus, you have to buy all the materials, and you have to keep the place up. I mean, how do you do it?
Well, a lot of it's donations, probably the biggest majority of them, and that's not as easy as it sounds because you do have to go out and solicit, for those donations. John and Betty, the president and secretary, they've done a pretty good job of applying for some just small little grants. We have 2 local grants that we apply for and get every year, and then we have a summer festival, which we raise a little money for that.
Yeah.
So. It's a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I know that John was telling us about some parts of the project that had to be put off until the money was available.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes then that the goods aren't available because you've put off being able to pay for it. So it's constantly this, isn't it?
Right, and the board made it the decision not to borrow. We want to, if we're going to do something, we want to make sure the money's there to get it done.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be really nice because you know that when you get, like you did with the Clad Adams cabin, you know that when you get this cabin up, stable, and at the height that it's supposed to be, that you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Well, there'll be some minor maintenance that you'll have to do, but nothing like trying to tear it down, raise it, and then raise it back up again.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the visit. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
John, I think our audience might like to get a chance to look at this village. I mean, we've been looking at one cabin,
right,
but it's really pretty impressive down here because you've got a number of, you probably got a half dozen of them, and starting with on this end, which is the church, and that's already been rehabilitated, hasn't it?
Well, it was in good shape. We've had an Eagle Scout that actually put the bell on the tower up there.
Nice.
He added the bell tower. The church itself was in pretty good shape. Some of the logs go the full length of that church.
So that would be, they're 18 feet long, those logs? Oh my goodness.
At least 18,
That's a
if not
handful.
longer.
That is a handful. Okay, and that's in
church
good enough shape because you've been able to store your roof and your sheeting in there, right?
So we put a new roof on it. That was one of the first things we did when we moved to the village, was put all new roofs on. And where we knew we were going to come back, we put metal roofs. So that's why that cabin will have a cedar shake roof, the one in the middle does, and the Clad Adams, because we're done with them basically.
Right.
But the rest of them, the whole cabin down there at the end has a metal roof on it because it still needs to be worked on.
Okay. This building over here looks like at one time it might have been falling in, but did you get it stabilized?
Yeah, we've worked on stabilizing it, and our next step is to raise it up. In fact, you can see where it's been split. And so we're going to put new logs under the foundation here, raise it up, and then put a new cedar shake roof on it.
And you call this what, a crib or a barn?
This is a corn crib.
Oh, corn crib.
This is actually the most unique structure in the village, according to our consultant. Most corn cribs never made it. So this corn crib dates to the 1850s.
Wow, nice. Okay, let's take a look. We have seen this, but not from this angle. There's the Frazier cabin that they're working on.
Right.
There's the Clad Adams cabin, which was the last one that you rehabilitated.
Right. We have 4 log cabin homes.
You've got the old ones, the old stone cabin, and you've got this log cabin.
Yeah, the stone structure is actually a smokehouse. That's where they would have put their meat in and smoked it.
Okay, did you, or was that brought here in the 60s?
Yeah,
Okay,
that also
that's been
was,
here.
the only thing we had to do with it was put a new cedar shake roof on it.
Nice thing about stone buildings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Once they're there, they're there.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
okay.
only thing it needed was a new roof.
Yeah. And what about this one here? This.
We basically have put a new roof on it, and we've rechinked it and made it so it's stabilized.
Yeah.
Actually, the best way to do it is to keep it the way it is and just redo it, rather than tearing it all the way down to the ground and putting it back up.
Yeah. But are you going to try to lift that one up to flood state?
Eventually, that'll probably go up, yes.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
But it's going to be one of the latter ones. The whole cabin will probably be the next one,
Yeah.
because it's straight in a row there.
Uh-huh. Any thought to adding any new cabins to the village? Have you located any that you want to move here?
Well, the Park District has sold us, and by the way, we're part of the Quincy Park District. The Park Board at the time we took over the village, and they said, you've got enough to deal with. Don't
Okay.
add any more.
Okay.
So at this point, we don't have any plans to add any more, but of course, I always keep my eye out, because what would be nice is to find a cabin that was actually from Quincy.
Yes.
All these are from the surrounding area.
Yeah. But they're Adams County, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
so-
Yeah.
Well, you're doing a great job. I don't know how you do it, but you keep adding to it, and you keep stabilizing these things, and people way after our generation are going to be able to see what it was like.
Well, that's what it's all about. Is we're trying to maintain history. We have school trips, tours down
Sure.
here. We had all the Quincy Junior High 7th graders down here last year and the year before.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it this year because of the
Yeah,
COVID-19 thing. But
Thank you.
thank you.
Helaman, we can get a bird's eye view of what your crew's doing now. And they're all, two of them are up on the roof, working on the roof. Another one's over here. Tell me about this man here. What's you doing here?
So he's using what's called a palm nailer, right? And it's basically it's a nail gun, but for hand drive nails. So you can stick a nail in it, and he's putting on rafter hangers. So what those hangers are, that's modern technology for you, right? They come from Simpson, and I've obviously nailed those joists into the ridge beam already, but those rafter hangers won't slip ever. So he's going through and putting nails in every single hole, and then ties the hanger back into the rafter and makes it so they won't ever slip, they won't separate, etc.
That's just sort of a secondary thing to make sure that lasts forever.
Increases the longevity of the roof, exactly,
Okay.
that connection.
Okay.
Yep.
And let's go walk over and see what this fellow's up
Okay.
to. Oh, we were talking about notching earlier. Is he notching the roof? Is that what he's doing?
So a little bit. So what he's doing right now is to extend the roof and get a good overhang. Those overhangs are critical because we want to protect the walls the best we can, right? So on conventional houses, right, you see an overhang off the front and off the sides. Well, that's to keep water, moisture, etc., as much as possible away from the walls. So we're going to do that same thing. I mean, originally there was a porch on this side, so we extended the porch, but then we're going to go out another 12 to 14 inches to keep all the moisture and the rain away from our timbers that support these rafters, right? So it won't sag or deteriorate on the end. So he's putting in these flat 2x4 supports that will let the roof hang out another 14 inches and not have it sag because it's tied back into our rafter
Okay, it
system.
protects it from the weather a little bit more too. Is that
Exactly.
that part of it?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the whole goal of those. So,
Okay, and then is this called sheeting that will go on the roof between these?
Yes. So on the top side of these rafters, 4x8 sheets of plywood will go on there, and that's really what gives the roof its lateral strength, right? So it won't creep one way or the other over time.
Okay. And then of course we've discussed the shingles.
Yes.
Cedar shingles are going.
So then we'll waterproof on top of those, and then the cedar breather, and then the shingles, right? So we can get the historic look like you see in the rest of the cabins.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you and your crew for letting us come into the danger zone here. This has been very interesting. I think the audience gets a flavor of what it's like. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This crew's been here 1 week. They're saying putting the sheeting, the chinking, and the shingles up, getting the roof on complete the project in another 2 or 3 days. Isn't that remarkable? With another Illinois story. In Quincy, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.